Welcome to another episode of Owning Your Personal Brand. I'm really excited that you were able to join us on this episode where we talk about podcasting and how you can use podcasts to really grow your brand and continue to own your brand. And this week, I am joined by a special guest, Jason Gillikin. He is the CEO of Earfluence, which is a podcast production company, and he will share his thoughts and insights on how podcasts work and how you can use it to really enhance your brand. So welcome, Jason, to the show.
Amie, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you so much. Let's get started by just sharing a little bit about yourself. I'd love for you to share how you got started in podcasting and kind of more about Earfluence and what your company does.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I just kind of fell in love with podcasting. This is back in 2017. I'd been working at a company, a digital marketing company for 10 years. And I was starting to get a little itchy. Like, what is my professional legacy? What do I want to do with the rest of my career? I've always wanted to run my own thing. But I was also starting to fall in love with podcasting and how I built this and Serial and Startup and some of those types of podcasts that were just phenomenal storytelling and interviewing. And so in 2017, I convinced my bosses to let me start a podcast, and it would be us interviewing our clients on how they built up their companies, their e-commerce companies. And they did. They let me do it, and I edited, hosted, produced, did all the things. And it was great. I mean, I enjoyed it. The bosses did not see the same vision for the podcast that I did. And then in 2018, I convinced my wife to start a podcast. I had been trying to convince her to write a book for years. She's a wedding planner, has amazing stories. And she's like, no. And I was like, well, what about a podcast? She's like, I don't even know what podcasts are, but sure, if you'll stop asking me to do these things, yes, I'll start a podcast. We thought it would be about the amazing wedding stories that she has, and like guests could come on and share their funny wedding stories. But what we saw quickly was that the education part of it really resonated with the audience. And so it was like how to do a timeline, how to do a rehearsal, how to do SOPs, those types of things to level up the wedding business. That's what resonated with the audience. And so it started to click. It was like, oh, wait a minute here. This can be so valuable for businesses. And again, I was trying to figure out something else to do. So in 2019, I set out to form Earfluence, quit my job, set out to form Earfluence. And here we are today. It's 2022, and we've got 2 studios, one in Raleigh founded, and one in American Underground. And we work with a lot of businesses, especially in the Triangle area, and producing their podcasts.
That is great. And how many do you have right now? Like, how many podcasts does your team produce?
We do 25 podcasts right now.
That is great. That's great. And I think one thing you hit on that's so important is the education piece. And I do think a lot of times when people sometimes think of podcasts as entertainment or something like that, but there is so much good content that you can find by listening to experts, but also good content that you can give. And that kind of leads into why we're talking now, like how you can really use podcasts to grow your brand. So give me some of your thoughts on how, from your experience with the clients you work with, how that act of doing a podcast can really help them to start a new brand or to grow a brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I look at your personal brand, Amie, and just by doing this podcast called Owning Your Personal Brand, like there's so much that comes to mind right away. One is you are the personal branding expert. So if anybody is looking to grow their personal brand, one of the first people that they should contact is you, because you have this podcast. You are owning that you are the expert of personal brand, right? And number 2 is that you value content. Like you are doing this live stream, which then is repurposed for a podcast. You might grab some snippets for other social media sharing. You value content right there. And then number 3, you're not afraid to take risks. Like so you might be listening to this on a podcast format, but what I'm seeing right now is this: we're live. Like we are live on LinkedIn and other platforms.
Yeah.
And so you're not afraid to take risks and step outside of your comfort zone. So to me, that says a lot about your personal brand right there. I think about for our clients, we've got one that's coming out soon with Dr. Pamela McCauley. She's a STEM expert, and she also likes shoes. And she's got a new podcast coming out called Stepping Up STEM. Like, so we've got the analogy of with the shoes, and then she's branding herself as the STEM expert, right? What she wants to do is have her speaking to be more in demand on STEM. She wants to grow her personal brand through this podcast, and she's done an amazing job of her personal brand already. But that's what she's doing. We work with Donald Thompson. He just rebranded his podcast from the Donald Thompson podcast to High Octane Leadership with Donald Thompson, because he wants that leadership piece. Like, he's an intense leader, right? High octane leader, an intense, powerful leader. And he wants that to be part of his personal brand. So I think about that and titling these podcasts and owning that personal space, owning that education space. That can be so powerful for just the start of building your personal brand.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And one of the things you mentioned too is, I believe the flexibility is really great for having your own show or podcast. So like you said, you could have a certain focus for your brand, and then if you need to change that, it's very easy to do through this platform. And you still have all of your old content. It's not like it goes away, but you're able to rebrand that. So I like that. I like that a lot. Talk about the other side a little bit. Let's say you're not ready to start your own podcast just yet, because it is scary. It is, like you said, it is taking a risk. I will attest to, it gets easier and better the more you do it. And I'm sure you can attest to the same. But one of the things that I did was I started to be a guest first, right? To just try to get a feel for what is that process like. So talk a little bit about that, because you also book a lot of the guests for your clients. What kind of benefit can the guest even see for their own personal brand?
Yeah, absolutely. And I encourage anybody who is thinking about starting a podcast to do exactly what you did and start to be a guest on other podcasts. They don't have to be like the most popular podcasts in the beginning. You're just trying to figure out what you want to talk about. And that's the key, right? What it can do is it'll give you those reps. It'll give you a sense of what it's like to be on a podcast. It'll give you talking points too. So if there's a certain speech that you want to give, or if there's a certain webinar, being on a podcast can help you kind of test that out and test out, what are my talking points here? If you were to go onto a podcast, Amie, and you offered up a suggestion of, hey, I can be on your podcast and I can talk about the top 3 tips that you need right now to level up your personal brand, that's interesting. And that's something where you can practice that speech. You can practice you can practice a webinar. You can do all these different things. And that kind of leads to how to be a guest on a podcast too, right? Because I get so many cold emails from people that want to be on one of our podcasts. And they're so dang long. Like, they are the TLDR. I did not read that. I am sorry. Like, I don't have time for that. You've got to be super concise with what your ask is, and come to the producer with, here's what I want to talk about. I'm coming with you with an idea of, I feel like I can talk to your audience about 3 ways to level up your personal brand. That's short. That is easy. Then you can also do your research on the podcast itself. And you can say something like, I noticed that you have not had this topic on, before. And I feel like this would be a great fit for your audience. So, if you can possibly reach out to somebody, keep it short, and then give them actual ideas on what to do, on what the actual podcast episode would be, that can be really powerful too. I'll tell you what, my wife's podcast is now in the top 1% of all podcasts. And yeah, she just passed 250,000 downloads, right? It's wild.
How many years?
4 years.
Okay, so that is awesome.
Yeah, she gets like 8,000 downloads a month, which sounds like a lot. And then for somebody like a Joe Rogan, doesn't sound like a lot, right? But she's in the top 1% of all podcasts for her niche podcast. The point is, she gets a lot of emails from people that want to be guests on the podcast. Most of them are terrible. Most of them are too long, didn't read. But there are some that clearly listen to the episodes and will say something like, I like ice cream too, Megan. I should be a guest on your podcast, because they've heard Megan say that she likes ice cream on a podcast, and Megan just melts and is like, "Cool. I don't even know what you want to talk about, but come
Yeah.
on, let's do this."
Yeah.
But anyway, to answer your question on guesting on podcasts, there's so many different reasons for it. It gets out the jitters of being on a podcast. You get used to doing it. You kind of hone your speaking topics, and you know what it takes to have a good podcast after you've been on a few.
Yeah. I think that's great. And just to recap, it's really no different than anything else if you're cold emailing someone. It's
Yeah.
what is it gonna take to stand out? Because you have to assume that that person gets at least 20 a day or something like that. So what's gonna take to stand out? And then, yeah, do your research. So how are you gonna pitch yourself to be on a podcast you've never listened to? So take a few listens to some episodes so you're familiar with their format and what they talk about. And so it does take a little bit of time. You can't just blast out hundreds of emails, but you need to really put some time and effort into it. So I like that a lot.
Yeah. And
That's
one other
nice.
thing I'll mention, Amy, as far as being a guest on a podcast, once you've been on a few, you should put a Spotify playlist together of the episodes that you've been on.
Huh.
And what you can do there is put that in your email signature. So,
Well, that's
podcasts I've been on, or embed it on your website. So, like maybe you've got a media page on your website, and you just put your Spotify playlist on there. Let's say, Amy, you've been on 15 podcasts over the last 3 years or so. Maybe it's more. I don't even know. You could put a Spotify playlist together, and that embed would be on your website, and people can click on it and see, oh, or listen to all your episodes right there.
yeah, I love it. That is great. Never thought of that. That is great. But I'll be doing that immediately. 'Cause that's great. Good, 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 good. So I think that, yeah, being a guest, I mean, it does make sense. Be a guest first if you're thinking about doing a podcast. But I think even if you're not looking to do a podcast yourself right away, it's still that good practice, because one thing you said was about the messaging. So if you've got a talk coming up, in a month, and maybe you just want to test out which of these topics feels better coming out, or which makes sense to go in this order or that order. It's an opportunity not to have them be a guinea pig, but it's just an opportunity for you to practice your messaging and the key things that you want to get across in a presentation or webinar. So I like that a lot as well. And then the other thing that I found helpful is just getting in front of a new audience, because while the topic you share, the thing I love so much about personal branding, it relates to everyone. So it doesn't matter. It could be a construction podcast, but even people in construction should think about their brand and how they present to their clients. And so that's one of the reasons I like this topic for me, because you might want to get in front of different audiences, not just marketing for what we do, but different audiences. And so you can take your topic and it can really appeal to a broad number of people. So I like that aspect as well.
Yeah, and let me piggyback on that real quick.
Mhm.
That is super important, and thank you for mentioning it. You want to leverage already existing audiences.
Yeah.
It is so hard to build up your own personal podcast audience.
Yeah.
If you can accelerate your message by going to already existing audiences, that's huge. And
Yeah.
that's the method that our friend Larry Long Jr. Employs. Like,
Mhm.
he's been on hundreds and hundreds of podcasts,
Yeah.
right? And it
Yeah.
seems like every day on LinkedIn, he's like, I was a guest on this amazing podcast. And
Yep.
it's great. Like, he's
Yeah.
got all this content out there that people can go listen to on from different audiences.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's just a good kind of low time investment, low cost investment way for you to really grow your brand.
Yes.
And also, like we said, test, because nobody, starts out with their brand knowing exactly what's going to work or what's not going to work. So it's a way for you to experiment a little bit.
Yeah.
So back to the people in the audience who do want to start their own podcast, aside from starting with being guests, what are some other things that they should do initially to get prepared to launch their own podcast?
Yeah. It's never going to be amazing in the beginning, right? It's just not. Like, your first episode, you're going to look back on it and be like, should I even keep that up? I don't even know. Like, I kid you not, I mentioned I convinced Megan to start a podcast back in 2018.
Mhm.
She just asked me to take down the first like 30 episodes. Like, all
She's
right, I'll
probably
do
like,
it.
I'm the top 1% now. I can't have that
Right.
out there.
Yeah, yeah. So it's never going to be amazing, right? In the beginning, if you want it to be a lot closer to amazing, you can hire somebody to help you
Mhm.
out with that and do coaching with that. In fact, if you go to earfluence.com/coaching, we've partnered with somebody who has an incubator, and like one-on-one coaching that can go ahead and help you out. But really, like, one of my one of our my favorite expressions is just press record. Let's see if we can. Yeah, just press record. And
Yeah.
what that means is you've got to start making the mistakes. You've got to start learning. You've got to start taking those risks. Our friend Javier, he's got the Pretend podcast, and he's now, I don't even know, probably at like 10 million downloads.
Oh,
It's
wow.
wild. It's a true crime light. People pretending to be somebody else. He's got a great series right now on Frank Abagnale from Catch Me If You Can. Turns
Mhm.
out his biggest con was convincing the world that he's a con artist. Anyway, you'll have to check that out. But when he first started out, this is like 2017, 2018, he recorded 5 episodes, threw them out because he didn't like it. But it was great for him because he made those mistakes and he figured out what was working and
Yeah.
what wasn't,
Yeah.
right? So just press record and figure out what you have. Another thing is you cannot be all things to all people.
Mhm.
So we go to these meetups and we run content creators meetups in the Triangle. And I hear people sometimes saying, yeah, my podcast is really about general interest and it's really for everybody. You can't do that. Like, you are not Dax Shepard. You are not Brene Brown. I'm sorry. Maybe you are. If Dax and Brene want to come to our meetups, you're more than welcome. But for the most part, if you're starting a podcast, you're not a celebrity. And so
Mhm.
you've really got to niche it down,
Mhm.
to what you want your podcast to be about and what you want to showcase, whatever your expertise is. Don't be all things to all people.
Yeah. That's crucial. That is crucial. And back to what we were saying earlier, you can change. So if you
Yeah.
start with one audience or one focus area, and then maybe, like you said, just press record, but then 5 weeks later you decide it's not resonating with people, it's not working, then you change it. But yeah, it definitely is important. You try to please everybody, please no one, I think is what the saying goes. And
Yeah.
so find your area, find your spot, keep it narrow, and over time, that audience will come. The people who want to hear what you're talking about will find you, and over time, you'll build that audience. But I think we have such a short attention span. We want everything to be wonderful immediately. We want an audience right now, and all of those things. And you do have to fall back from that and focus on the experience, the content, and kind of those longer term goals, and then things will kind of happen. I'm sure that you never thought you would have 25 podcasts in this short period of time. Like, things, it's like one thing happens good, then it means two things happen. Two things happen, the four things happen. And so it's like, if you just really start with that focus of what you're good at, what you're going to talk about, what you're going to do, it will lead to some success. So I
Yeah,
like
for
that a
sure.
lot.
Yeah, and you've got to be careful about how you define success, because with podcasting, and I thought in the very beginning when I started my first podcast in 2017, I thought it would be about spreading virally and selling
Mm,
ads, like, selling the Squarespace ads, selling the
mhm,
MeUndies ads, selling the BetterHelp ads, like all
mhm.
these different things. And then I quickly realized, like, wait a minute here, the podcast itself is, in a sense, an advertisement for the person
Right,
that's doing the podcast,
right.
right?
Yeah,
So for you owning your personal brand, I mean, it's you love it, you love doing it. It's building up Amie Thompson's personal brand, but
yeah.
in a way, it's an advertisement for Creative Allies,
That's right.
right? Like,
That's right.
go ahead and sign up with Creative Allies or inquire with Creative Allies if you want
Yeah,
to know more about building your business brand or your
yeah.
personal brand,
That's
right?
right. Yeah,
So, like, you don't need advertisements to have it be an effective podcast. And
yeah.
so, like, when you have expectations of, is this going to be good for networking for me? Is this going to be good for building content for me? Is this going to be good for showcasing what I know?
Mhm,
Am I checking those boxes? Great. Like, the download numbers will come. They'll
mhm.
start off small, but they will come.
Yeah,
And you need to make sure that your goals aren't really related to the downloads, at least initially.
yeah. I agree with that, and I think that content piece is so important because if it's evergreen, if you're not talking about like right now things, you never know what could happen in the news, what could happen in the world where somebody starts searching for something you did 3 months ago. And
Yeah.
then they find that content and it's right there and it's packaged nicely and all that stuff. So it is that is the one thing that I feel like I did well is not focus on the numbers so much as focus on creating great content, having interesting guests, things like that, and then start making those other adjustments later to build the audience and everything. So, but
Yeah.
that's really good. One thing we've been talking about, and you've mentioned it throughout, but I want some dedicated time to mistakes. What mistakes have you made or you've seen clients make with podcasts that you can help people avoid? What are some things to not do, as you're starting a podcast?
Oh boy. I've made a lot of mistakes. Like we've done thousands of episodes of
Yeah.
podcasts, so we've made some mistakes for sure. Uh, so like I mentioned, my shirt, just press record. That's
Yeah.
also a reminder to actually press the record button. There's been there there's been like one or two times where
Okay.
it hasn't worked out. Now one thing is if a guest isn't great, you can always say like, oh, the file was corrupted or something. oh, the producer forgot to press record or
Right.
something like
Oh
that.
God.
If you don't want to use that, the other mistake that people make initially is I mentioned that they're trying to be all things to all people.
Mhm.
I would make sure that you're outlining the first 10 episodes of your podcast and you have some sort of structure in place, and you can certainly modify that. But if it's too freewheeling, if it's too willy-nilly, like it's just not gonna work.
Mm,
And those are the reasons that most podcasts don't even get to 10 episodes,
mm,
is they're not sure what they want to do. So outline everything and make sure that you have a list of guests that you want to reach out to, that you have a list of topics that you want to cover on this particular podcast.
mhm,
So have some sort of structure with it. Feel free to make mistakes, of course,
mhm.
but have some sort of structure to it before you get started.
Got it. No, that's really good. I appreciate that. Well, we are actually wrapped up, and this has been a great conversation. And so I appreciate all the insights and the thoughts. But before we do go, a couple of things. How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out about either learning more about podcasting or about doing their own podcast?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So you can go to earfluence.com or you can find me on LinkedIn. And my handle is there. There we go. It's at Jason Gillikin on LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect. And then talk to us about something new that you're launching that I'm hearing about. Really interesting. So talk about one of your new podcasts.
I appreciate the space for this, Amy. We have, like you mentioned, about 25 podcasts,
Mhm.
and I love all of them. One I'm really excited about is our own podcast that we're doing called Charity Champions. And I was thinking about this, like we all have a voice. And I'm not, me personally, I'm not doing enough with that voice. We have this platform, and there's so much good that's going on in our community,
Mhm.
and so many amazing charities in this community. Like, how can we amplify what the people behind these charities are doing, and showcase the benefits of all these charities? So we're starting a podcast called Charity Champions, which is going to be focused on charities in the Triangle, and it's going to be a different host with each episode. So the first episode is Jess Averhart from the Reinvention Roadmap. She's going to interview Brooke Dickhart from the Joel Fund, as well as one of the veterans from the Joel Fund, who goes by Eddie Spaghetti. He's hilarious. I don't think it's his last name. I'm not sure, but he goes by Eddie Spaghetti. The second episode, we've got Tim McLaughlin from Co-Founders Capital. He's interviewing a husband and wife team that are highly involved in charitable work in the Triangle, the Dobbin Specs. So Thorn from Band Together, and then Nisha from One of Us. You probably know both of them. And then the third episode, Marcus Ginyard from UNC basketball fame, former UNC basketball captain, is back after an overseas career, and he's building his personal brand. Right? Oh, he'd be a great guest, by the way, Amy. But he's interviewing Jennifer Player from Habitat Orange
Mhm.
County. And then Donald Thompson from High Octane Leadership Podcast. in the diversity movement. He's interviewing a couple people from Easter Seals.
Okay.
So this podcast I'm so excited about because it just amplifies what the charities are doing. And what we want to do is drive awareness,
Mhm.
drive volunteerism, and drive donations to these charities.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited about it too. And, I had mentioned to you before at Creative Allies, we have lots of nonprofit organizations. And of course, marketing and awareness is something they all struggle with. It's like, how do they get out these great stories? They all do great work. And so, how do they get these stories out and raise money for the great work that they do? So, I really appreciate that you're doing this for the community. The other thing that's so funny is there's so many people who want to help, but they
Yeah.
often don't know about some of these smaller nonprofits. So this will be a great way for your audience to listen and learn something new about an organization that they may want to volunteer with or donate to. So I'm really excited about this as well. And where can people go to find this new podcast?
Sure. So you can search for Charity Champions on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, or check out earfluence.com.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Well, I appreciate that. I'm really excited about that new podcast and also just what your company has grown into. And I certainly appreciate you being here with us today and talking about how podcasting can help with your personal brand. Like I always say, everyone has a personal brand, and it's really up to you to own it and make sure that you own it before somebody else does. You don't want that. And so thank you again to Jason for joining us today and talking about ways that you can grow your brand through podcasting. And I appreciate everyone who joined us today, and make sure you join again next week with a new topic and a new guest talking about owning your personal brand.